Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me for another card making tutorial. Today we're going to make another light up card using SMD 5050 LEDs. I'm going to start with a list of equipment that you will require to complete this project. So you'll require a die cutting set that has a car. You'll need a little person to reflect who you're making the card for, and then some number dies, which I used for the balloons. You will require some clear packing tape, some double-sided tape, a pokey tool, a pencil, a pickup stick, a pair of scissors, a bone folder, some good liquid adhesive, some ruler or T-ruler, and some foam tape. Then to complete the paper circuit, you're going to need a 3-volt button cell battery like you see on screen. I'm using a CR2032, but you just need any 3-volt button cell battery. Then you'll also require 2 SMD LEDs for this project. And again, I'm using SMD 5050 LEDs. And you'll require some conductive copper tape. The one that I use is about 5 mils wide and comes in a 20-meter roll. And that's a basic summary of everything that you'll require to complete this project. So now I'm going to get started on all the fun stuff. I'm going to get my Gemini Junior die cutting machine out, and I'm going to run through the first pass of dies, which is going to be the car. And then the second and final pass is going to be the little person and the numbers, which I'm planning to use as the balloons. So I was quite pleased to have got this project cut in only 2 passes. It does make it a lot easier when I'm not messing about with the plates and the cardstock. So once all the pieces are cut, I've grouped them into sections. I've got the car, the little person, and the balloon dies. What I'm doing now is I'm choosing placement of where those headlights are going to be, and I've grabbed the dies and taped those down so that I can run that through my manual die cutting machine. I've chosen a manual one over the electronic one just because there's a lot of dimension there already with the number plate and the bumper, etc. I don't really want that to squish down and lose its dimension. So I'm using a Sizzix Big Shot, which I just am using off screen. So now I am using a piece of recycled cardstock, which was from my son's Lego set. I'm grabbing the card front where the paper circuit's actually going to go, and I'm using that as a guide to select a section of cardstock that I would like to use as the background so I can get the most out of this recycled piece of paper. So I'm just going to grab my pencil and run it along the edge of the cardstock so that I can make sure that when I go to my Tim Holtz guillotine, I'm not going to cut it too short or too, too large or lose too much of that landscape. I'm just checking that I can actually see those pencil marks because it does get quite difficult to see. So I just quickly take that over to my Tim Holtz guillotine and chop it up. And I'm really happy with the way that that's come out. Next step is to place the headlight dies in again. So I'm choosing placement of where the car's going to go. And then I'm grabbing the dies once again and popping those into the holes that are on the car itself where the headlights will go. They basically just fit in like a puzzle piece, so you'll feel them sort of pop into place. Then what I do is I grab some washi tape just to hold it in so that the placement's going to be bang on, and then I run that through my die cutting machine again. And again, for the same reasons I mentioned before, I am doing this with my manual die cutting machine, and I am actually using a Spellbinders Platinum 6, sorry, not the Sizzix, because the Spellbinders Platinum 6 just sits on my desk because it's a lot smaller and so compact. So once I've run that through the die cutting machine, I'm just removing the dies, popping them away on my magnetic sheet so that I don't lose them. And then we're going to get to the fun part, which is going to be the paper circuit, which is going to be on the piece of cardstock behind the one that we've just worked on. So now we're going to work on the paper circuit. I've marked out where the headlights are going to go by holding the piece of paper that we were just working on over this one that the circuit's going on, marked out with X's where the headlights are going to go. So now that I know where they're going to go, I'm marking out the lines for the paper circuit. So this is where the copper tape's going to run to complete the circuit. So I'm marking out the positive line and the negative line. Obviously you've seen the SMD LEDs are only about 5mm wide, so they're very small, and I do need to make sure that I'm keeping those lines very close together because there's little silver sections underneath the LED that need to touch along the positive line and along the negative line to light up, so I have to keep them within that sort of 4 to 5mm apart. So once I've marked out the circuit, I'm grabbing my copper tape and trimming it to size. Then I'm grabbing a piece of paper which is folded over as my switch. The piece of paper basically just needs to be big enough to house your battery and a little bit of foam tape either side. So I tend to always place it in this orientation. I don't know why, it just seems to work for me, and I'm comfortable with running the tape over the one side and under the other. So I guess it's just what I'm comfortable doing. So now I'm running the negative line. It's basically just the bottom side of the battery. So I'm running it at an angle and then turning it or creating a bit of a bend or a corner there. And then making sure that that's sitting really snugly along where those X's are. Then once I'm happy with the placement, I grab my bone folder and burnish the line so that I'm going to get a really smooth run of that power once I've got the battery in there. So now I'm doing the other line, which is the positive line, which goes over the battery. Again, making sure that it's very close to those X's. So you'll notice that it's running very, very close to the other line. But I am making sure that they don't touch because that will mean that the circuit actually won't work. So again, I'm running that over the switch, trimming it, and then I will grab my bone folder and burnish everything down as I did on the negative line. And that's basically it. So now I'm going to grab my 3-volt button cell battery and place it in my circuit so that I can start testing the SMD LEDs. I'm going to check that the battery is still good so that works, and I'm going to check the correct orientation for the placement of the lights, because they'll only light up if it's positive to positive and negative to negative. And let me tell you, these babies are bright. So bright. So once I know that the battery is working and that the lights are in the correct orientation, I'm going to grab something heavy to place down to make sure that that circuit is connected while I'm securing the LEDs down. I do use wide packing tape for this, wide clear packing tape, and I cut it fairly large. Basically what I'm trying to do is make sure that there's quite a lot of pressure on the actual SMD itself, or LED itself, so that once the battery is connected, that there's enough pressure for those little lights to actually activate. And like I said, these are so bright, particularly before you've got all the vellum, etc., covering those headlights. And speaking of vellum, I am now working on the rear side of the Cityscape, which is the card front, and I'm securing a double layer deep of vellum over each space for the headlights, rather than using liquid adhesive to secure the vellum in place, because that can be quite visible and not look very nice. I've decided to use the packing tape that was already on my desk to hold the vellum in place. It's clear, it's strong and secure, and nobody's really going to see it. So now, before I secure the car down, into its permanent place, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing my Barely Art glue and I'm going to secure the steering wheel in place. In Australia, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, so the driver's on the right-hand side. So when you're looking at the vehicle, the driver would be on the left, which is where I am placing the steering wheel. I'm just making sure to adjust the steering wheel so that I'm happy with the number of little columns you can see from the outer part of the steering wheel to the horn, because I think it looks quite nice when you've got a minimum of 2 of those visible, and if I just twist it enough you can see that. Then I'm leaving that to dry for a second, testing out how the diffusion is with those headlights, and I'm really happy with the 2 layers of vellum. I think that was a good call from past experience. That's what I've usually done. Now I'm securing the little boy in place, making sure that he's not too high, not too low, and then using my Barely Art glue to secure him. There's obviously a bit of wiggle room with liquid glue, so I have opted to use my reverse tweezers to hold him in place and let him dry while I go and secure the silver frames for the headlights in over the front of the vellum. So I'm grabbing my Barely Art glue with the precision tip and framing up where those silver parts are going to go. Now, just like the dies sort of fitted in like a puzzle piece when you were running them through for the layer through the car and the layer through the card front, the silver parts do just pop into place as well, the silver die cuts. I'm giving those a few seconds to dry while I secure the car or glue the car ready to secure it to the card front. I'm just careful when I'm going and gluing the front part where the little boy is and where the roof is, because I don't want any glue oozing under the acetate which I've attached for the windshield. And then I'm just lining that up bang on with the headlights and slowly pressing it down, using my fingers and the glue as a weight just to make sure that it's nice and securely in place. Obviously there's a bit of wiggle room with liquid glue, so I'm trying to be very careful so as not to misalign those headlights, because it will really ruin all the effort I've put in so far. So now I'm going to grab my foam tape and I'm going to pop a double layer deep all around the actual battery to house it. Now I do leave the, what do you call it, the adhesive, or that backing, the green backing you can see there, I do leave that on the rear side where the switch is, because you don't want it to glue down and keep that connection running the whole time. You want it to be lifted up off the battery. You want the switch part to be lifted up off the battery so that you have to actually press it to engage the lights. And then I'm just grabbing a bunch more tape to make sure that the card front is nice and level, and placing that all over the back. And it can obviously run over the conductive copper tape. That's not going to matter because that circuit is already in place. Then I'm just going to make sure to correctly align the card front onto that base, lining up the headlights and making sure that all the corners line up nicely, because that foam tape I'm using is not very forgiving if I were to misalign that. So what I do at each stage of the process of doing a light up card is I test to make sure that the lights are working. I'm very happy that they are working. So now what I'm doing is grabbing my double-sided tape to secure the card front to the actual card itself. Apologies for the lighting. I did work on this card throughout the day. It's now nighttime, my kids are in bed, and I'm back to finishing off my card. So I basically just pop the double-sided tape on the back, remove the corners so as just to get it mostly lined up, and then once it's pressed down, I pull the tabs out, and that's a trick that I learned when watching Natasha Foot's videos. Now I am just trying to decide the placement of the balloons, and I actually not too sure where I want them, so I've popped them away and I'm just thinking about it now. I'm going to mark the push here section so that you know exactly where to push to activate those lights, because you do kind of have to get it in just the sweet spot for that to work. So I'm moving the card to the outer edge of my Nelly stamping platform because it's going to cause the less distortion to the letters if I'm using the outer edge as opposed to the tight edge where the I can't even think the hinge is. And I am using my Hero Arts black dye ink, and I'm doing that, I think maybe 3 or 4 times I did it, and just decided to do it time after time rather than pressing too hard so as to distort the letters. So just gently tapping it down, checking it, and then reapplying ink and pressing it down until I'm happy with it. And that looks pretty good, pretty legible. I'm happy with that. Just going to give it a couple of seconds to dry. And now that it's all dry, I'm just testing again to make sure, and I love how that just brings the card to life. So I had to think about it. I didn't actually like the 16 that I had cut earlier. The balloons were too big and I couldn't really find the right placement for them. So I've just popped those aside, and I found my skinny number die set and used that instead. I'm not actually going to use it as balloons in the end. I just decided to use the 16 in the far left corner. When you're 16 in Australia, you can get your driver's license. So I decided to specifically make the 16 in the top left corner for that reason. And obviously, if you can get your driver's license, then it's going to be your learners, because you are going to start out on the learners. And what I did to make my little L plate that would go on the front and back of your car, as you tend to do in Australia, I used a little banner die that I had, which has the whole alphabet. So I just took the L, cut it once out of yellow cardstock, cut it once out of black cardstock, and then puzzle pieced them together and trimmed off the banner section so that it was a square. I was really happy with how I managed to shop my stash, as you call it, and use my existing dies in a different way than they were originally intended. And the T ruler is just perfect for lining up the 16. And I think, yeah, I'm really quite happy with how that turned out. So that's basically the completed card, and I'm testing everything out, and it's just, yeah, turned out really well. If you haven't made a light up card before, I do encourage you to give it a go. This is a very brief run through making the card, but if you do want to look up SMD LEDs, a beginner's guide, you will be able to see the process from start to finish in a bit more detail. Thank you for joining me today.